And Amy, it's a little bit of a financial literacy segment. Important. You're going to find out just how important Bitcoin is. Of course, I think a lot of people most people have heard of it. Certainly people listening to this show have heard of it. But I mean, how much do you really understand about it, where currency's going? We have folks that don't necessarily believe in the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, much less any other government. And so fiat money is something that they wanted to get away from. Thus, the hearkening back to the gold standard. Perhaps stockpiling gold in these times because you don't believe in monetary policy at the federal level in this country. Well, Bitcoin, this cryptocurrency, as it's termed, has exploded. Over the last 4 years, it's gone from virtually zero in terms of dollar value to today, as we're talking.
Drum roll, because this is shocking.
One Bitcoin, if I would have bought one Bitcoin 4 years ago, I could be out of here. One Bitcoin is worth $6,588.
$6,588.
Yeah.
And you could have bought a Bitcoin for what, $200?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
I mean,
I'd be
on
here.
Easy Street. You'd have all the volleyballs you want.
I would. I'd have a new used minivan.
So exactly, yeah.
Not the whole minivan.
You could have bought a minivan like that was made in the 2000s.
I know.
Yeah, that'd be nice, huh? That's living. Well,
the doors would work and everything.
Why is Bitcoin exploded? What is it? Should you buy Bitcoin? Should you traffic in Bitcoin? For answers to all these questions and more, we're pleased to be joined by Scott Diamond, who has become a cryptocurrency expert. He's a partner with Ronin Partners, RONIN Partners, roninpartners.org, experts in this field. And Scott, thanks for joining us. Your story is interesting because I think when I first met you, you were doing medical staffing, right?
Correct.
And then you ventured off into this arena of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. Explain the transition.
Well, for most people in this space, they have serendipitous stories on how they got here, and really mine was more reading about all the bad stuff that Bitcoin was associated with. And the more that I was reading, the more that I realized is that all of the bad press that preceded, my knowledge of it was really based on really the human condition and not market conditions.
So who created Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin was actually created anonymously. This goes back to really the 1970s when people were starting to understand that, trying to figure out digital ways of moving money. So a group of folks that were loosely banded in message boards called the cypherpunks were using cryptography and mathematics to try to solve the double spend problem, which is essentially if you have something that's digital, it's ultimately infinitely copyable for virtually free, which makes it really bad for money when a 12-year-old can counterfeit it. So a gentleman, most likely, could have been a group of people, could have been a female, but identified themselves throughout this ecosystem and this message boards as Satoshi Nakamoto, which was obviously a pseudonym. But at that point, Satoshi was the one who started solving these problems mathematically and cryptographically, and in January 3rd, 2009, launched Bitcoin to the world. And it was really just more of a social experiment. I believe that Satoshi was more a mathematician and not a computer science person.
Well, so it's interesting because Cypherpunks was my high school band name. It was a Joy Division cover band. I was the lead singer. I went by the name Satoshi.
Satoshi.
So it's just weird. It's eerie, the coincidence.
Main character of Heroes too, right? Soshi Nakamoto.
Yes.
So here's the thing. Well, actually, tell your professional story because I think it speaks to this sector. You went from the staffing company because you had this interaction with your CEO, and explain what happened.
Well, back then, of course, I couldn't predict the future, but the more that I started to learn, the more confidence that I had that there were some opportunities, and I kind of facetiously was throwing out suggestions that we should put our line of credit as a private business to work in this space, and was immediately and consistently shot down, which was probably maybe the most responsible thing to say at the time. So But as I learned more, I decided that I wanted to start putting my own personal capital to work in this space because I really started believing what the future could be.
And at the time, you wanted to put like $1 million of that line of credit into
that's
Bitcoin?
That's what I threw out there. It's like, hey, let's take $1 million at 2% and try to throw it at this space.
And what would that be worth today?
Well, the way that things were being diversified, it would have probably been in the $35 to $40 million space.
Oh, that's not,
yeah, 35x return is not bad over a few years.
So, what supports the value of Bitcoin?
Well, that's a great question, and honestly, that's one of the most fascinating learnings that I think just about anybody who gets into the space is what supports the value of anything. I mean, the value that we give gold, the value that you give anything else, is really just kind of a shared human illusion. But it works when groups of people get together and they share the same illusion. What supports the value of Bitcoin? You're seeing it today. It's people who are committing their time, effort, and resources to build an ecosystem. And to those who say Bitcoin doesn't have any value, I say, well, here, why don't we first talk about defending government fiat money systems and fractional reserve banking? And just juxtapose that against what Bitcoin offers.
So what does that ecosystem look like? In other words, where can you transact in Bitcoin? How much is it growing in terms of an actual currency to exchange goods and services?
Yeah, and that's probably the most interesting part about it is because every day there are literally tens of thousands of people who are being exposed to this idea, and everybody is kind of self-educating themselves right now. And that's where you have more and more people is creating more and more demand, and the Bitcoin supply is strictly limited by computer code and can't be manipulated. So when you have restricted supply and increasing demand, that's a pretty simple economic message around why the price is going up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, how can Bitcoin be regulated?
Well, so cryptocurrencies in general, whenever they are open sourced, they are essentially borderless, meaning that there is no real jurisdictional opportunity to be able to regulate it. Now, you can regulate companies that are working within your borders that are dealing within the exchange of Bitcoin, but the actual Bitcoin network is not regulatable, I guess, is the comment. So, and the other thing too, I kind of want to touch on is the fact that Bitcoin is more of an idea in terms of something that's not really physical. So obviously it's computer code, but Bitcoin, when you talk about one Bitcoin, what you're really talking about is a 100 million subparts of programmable code that are grouped together, and then people just call that Bitcoin. So you're not actually going out there and buying physical Bitcoin.
Right.
What you're doing is you're laying claim on the open ledger system that you now have control over 100 million subparts, which brings a lot of cool opportunities to do microtransactions where you really have the streaming of money. I think new financial services are going to start blowing up in a good way, where you're going to be able to find, say your children or grandchildren will be able to get a mortgage that they pay back every 60 seconds versus once every 30 days, where paychecks and the streaming of value can actually happen in very small incremental terms, and they can do it within a ledger system.
And so how is it? It's transparent and anonymous, these transactions, right? Because it's coded.
It is, and it is transparent in terms of that anybody can see any transaction, but the accounts are just jumbled numbers and letters, so there's not personal identity that are attached to the accounts. Now, there are ways of being able to backtrack transactions because eventually at some point you are coming off of the U.S. financial rails and getting into the Bitcoin space. So my accounts are, my bank account, my Chase account is attached to a physical entity here in the United States that I use called Coinbase, and then I move those funds off chain. So there is a way for people to go back, but for you and me, I wouldn't be able to understand who's who.
Well, and so what are the types of transactions that are happening where Bitcoin is becoming more popular to use? I mean, is it people, a convenience store perhaps in another country is accepting Bitcoin for payment for, chips in a pop? I mean, is that stuff happening?
It's happening outside of the first world financial areas. So certainly there's not a lot of,
Retail.
medium of exchange type use cases in the first world. So that's absolutely kind of going to happen over time. You see here, Overstock.com is pretty much the thought leader in this space in the United States. But certainly, the use cases that are already apparent are really cross-border remittances, where people can move money to family and friends off of the financial rails that are taking 15, 20, 25% in some cases.
I mean, I just wanted to make that clear because this is more than just an investment. I mean, you buy gold. I mean, yes, you can
Right.
translate that, but it's really an investment. It's a hedge, right? Gold is a hedge against inflation. Is Bitcoin similar?
Absolutely. The biggest use case right now in the first financial world, as I call it, is really as a store of value, and that's what people have historically looked at gold as being for the last 5,000 years. But once you start understanding that when you have programmable money, you can't email gold. You can't subdivide gold into 100 million subparts and give it away. You have to store gold. You have to pay people to store gold. You have to pay commissions in order to acquire it. Gold is being valued right now at $9 trillion globally. There's no way of taking an audit of gold. You don't know how much gold is actually out there in the world.
True.
Governments hold it. They hold it, and they don't share information. Lots of famous stories of gold going missing and not being able to be returned intra-country. So really, Bitcoin is so transparent. It's going to revolutionize, I believe, a lot of things.
Why are there so many other versions of cryptocurrencies?
Well, naturally, as Bitcoin got started, Satoshi put in a very, very strict what's called a consensus mechanism, which means that you have to have a very high degree of agreement within the community before hard changes can be made to the system. A lot of people look at that as being one of the, kind of a hindrance or a drawback for Bitcoin. So what people are trying to do is create other ecosystems that serve the same meaning, but they do so under different rules, which are easier to change. Now, the challenge with that, and why I'm more of a Bitcoin maximalist than anything else, is that now you have humans involved. Satoshi did a brilliant thing when he walked away from Bitcoin, because in 2012, he basically dropped the mic, and he had 1 million Bitcoin that he had mined for the first 2.5 years, and he has it sitting on in an open account that anybody can see, and it's basically an opportunity to be able to say, this system is so secure. Right now, as of the pricing today, that's $6.5 billion of value that's just sitting out there for anybody to grab if they could, but you can't, because that's where you start understanding the security of the system.
Well, so the competition for other cryptocurrencies and the problems there, also in terms of the value, and so the continued attractiveness of this as it increases in value. So there's 16 million Bitcoins in circulation, but it's capped at something like 21 million. And so what's the kind of future store of value do you see based on that cap?
Well, one thing to consider is that Bitcoin as currency is really just the first application. The analogy that most people use is that nobody really understood the internet until they experienced email, and then they could kind of understand what it meant to be able to move data packets over telephony lines at the time. So that's what's going to happen here, is that there is an entire army, mostly a volunteer army of people that are developing other applications that are going to sit on top of Bitcoin that are going to be able to revolutionize anything, digitizing, real estate titles, doing a whole bunch of things, which is going to open up a new area of finance because the flexibility that it allows.
And so where the value of Bitcoin goes based on the scarcity of it.
Well, supply and demand. So the way that Bitcoin is actually released into the marketplace by code is that every 10 minutes there are a group of essentially volunteers, but they do get compensated with Bitcoin, which actually solves the math problem, which provides the security to the Bitcoin network, and they're called miners. So every 10 minutes, 12.5 Bitcoin are released into that community, and that is meant to be able to be given to them so that they can then liquidate it for their fiat currency so that they can pay for their hardware, they can pay for their staff. Every 4 years, that amount goes down. So for the first 4 years, it was 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Then it was 25. Now we're in the 12.5 range. In the year 2020, probably late June, early July of 2020, it's going to have again. So it'll be, I guess, 6.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. But then the miners also collect fees, transaction fees. So that provides the economic incentive for people to join. And by more people joining into that system, it decentralizes, which again adds more and more security to the system.
So you've got that happening, the kind of the slow release over the next 100 years of Bitcoin, the remaining Bitcoin to be released, to be mined and released. And then you've got the blockchain technology, I guess that's what they call it, with respect to some of the other applications that are being developed to, to build off of Bitcoin.
Correct. I mean, Bitcoin really, kind of paved the way for other people to be able to say, okay, decentralized ledger technologies, blockchain technologies, we see where the security is, we see where the efficiencies are. Now let's start building applications within our own industry or within our own business. So there are a lot of things that aren't really cryptocurrencies. In fact, actually, I prefer using the term crypto assets in terms of a store of value.
Make a note of that.
Because not everything,
Thanks.
not everything is meant to be a currency. Right now, in the Wild West heydays that we're experiencing today, things are maintaining a store of value, but I don't believe that that's going to continue. I believe that there'll be a few winners and a lot of losers.
So where do you, I mean, Bitcoin's at $6,500 a Bitcoin today. Where do you see it going in 2 years, 5 years?
Well, that's always the sexy question, I guess.
Yes, I want to know.
Provocative.
I want to know. I'm
Yeah.
scraping together my Bitcoin investment money.
Well,
What
when
you
I
gonna give
was
me for Christmas,
Yeah,
one
right.
Bitcoin.
Yeah,
That's all I need.
maybe 1/10 of a Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Okay.
which you can get. I mean, you could literally
can?
buy a penny worth of Bitcoin. I mean, the transaction fees doesn't make it reasonable, but you can do it because you can subdivide a quote-unquote Bitcoin 100 million ways.
Oh, so you're saying I have a chance?
Yeah.
You're saying you have a chance.
1/100 millionth for Christmas.
Exactly. So, yeah, no, I mean, from a price prediction standpoint, I was, a year ago we were sitting at, probably about a year ago today, about $600, and I was easily seeing the future being, 3,500 to 4,000, and people were laughing at me. And then as the
they're
the
not
turn of the
laughing at
year.
you now.
Well,
You're
yeah.
their
So
best
my
friend.
phone does blow up now because
Yeah.
now everybody who's been laughing at me for 3 years is now want to be my best friend.
Right.
And, the sky's the limit. I tell people it's like if people value gold, which is really just a shiny rock that's manipulated and unauditable, and the global finance world values that as $9 trillion. Well, if Bitcoin's even half that, which I believe is possible, and you divide that against the emission rate of 144 new Bitcoin every single day, you're looking at $225,000, $250,000 Bitcoin. So I do tell people it's like,
Wow.
this is absolutely mind blowing in terms of where this can go.
All right. Get Reisman on the phone. I want my my salary paid in Bitcoin from this point forward. He is Scott Diamond, our new best friend as well. He is a partner at Ronin Partners, RONIN Partners, roninpartners.org if you want more information about this, because one of the things you do is you and your partners go around educating business people about this technology, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a new technology, so it's creating a new language. Go back to 1850 and start talking to people about airbags and analog brakes, and nobody would know what you're talking about. So new technology creates new language, and the one thing is that you're not going to be able to put yourself in a position of making responsible business decisions tomorrow unless you become fluent in the language today. So that's really our leading, kind of use case for our services is essentially just executive education, because you got to get smart first before you dive in. And I certainly tell people, don't run around with your hair on fire that you're missing something, because this is forever. I mean, the genie's out of the bottle and it's not going away. So the opportunities are there for individuals, for private companies, for public companies. Look at what Overstock is doing. So those guys are brilliant.
Scott Diamond, thank you so much for the Bitcoin tutorial. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Fa la 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 la, ka-ching.